very warm welcome. You're watching News 18 Global. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Let's dive into this segment with our top focus on the SCO Foreign Ministers meet, which commenced in Goa from today. Several important topics were discussed, and External Affairs Minister of India, Dr. S Jaishankar, held separate meetings with his SCO counterparts on day one. It's important to note that Dr. Jaishankar held wide-ranging talks with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on overall bilateral cooperation, the Ukraine conflict as well, and regional as well as global issues of mutual interest. While on the other hand, the External Affairs Minister held bilateral talks with Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang regarding the ongoing border row along the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh especially. Now, the discussions focused on resolving outstanding issues and ensuring peace and tranquility in the border areas. It should be noted that Pakistan's foreign minister is in India for the first time in 12 years. But India has decided to turn down Pakistan's request for a bilateral meeting between the two foreign ministers. Now, foreign ministers of 8 member states of the Shanghai Cooporation Organization have attended this meeting, and this crucial meeting will now set the stage for the SCO Leaders Summit to be held in July in India's national capital, New Delhi. CNN News 18 has been tracking the SCO Foreign Ministers meet from Goa, which is the ground zero for this meet. And for that, I'm joined in by my colleagues Anand Narasimhan and Abhishek Jha, who are joining me live from Goa. Many thanks to you, Abhishek and Anand. Abhishek, now if I could begin with you, Lavrov's visit arrives 24 hours after the Kremlin was attacked. On a multilateral fora such as the SCO, did you sense a guarded silence by Russia's foreign minister?
Clearly, it was a time when Lavrov was actually more keen to, put the point of view of Russia to the world, and this was also an opportunity where he could have engaged with the Russian counterpart, Qin Gang also, and the Central Asian counterparts as well. India also happens to be a very crucial partner, especially if you see in the context of Russia-Ukraine war. India has always maintained a neutral stance despite a lot of pressure from West and USA. And in fact, India has become a very huge trade partner to Russia as well. In fact, about 1/4 to 1/3 of oil import is directly coming from Russia right now. So India has a huge revenue generation machine also for Russia, if we can say that. Also, he had Lavrov had a bilateral meeting with Pakistan. Also, we have seen Pakistani Foreign Minister recently visiting Moscow, where both the nations were keen to engage in more energy sector cooperation. So in that context, these meetings were really important for Russia right now. Having said that, we have not heard anything right now if Lavrov had directly talked about the attack that has happened on Kremlin to any of his counterparts, till now.
Right. Anand, how significant was the meet between the two foreign ministers, considering both sides agreed to follow a fair multipolar system of interstate relations that, of course, is an indirect reference to the Russia-Ukraine war?
Well, creating a multipolar system is not an easy job right now, because most of the nations who are engaged within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are in conflict with each other. Biggest aspect is India-Pakistan, India-China. China has its own issues with Russia in terms of territorial aspects in the Vladivostok region. If Myanmar comes into the equation, then that further stirs up the pot. Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan have their own issues in terms of being surrounded, and the hegemony of the Chinese trying to weigh on them, and the pressures of the erstwhile Soviet Union nations vis-a-vis Russia and the NATO powers. So NATO is increasingly moving east. So multipolar, multilateral platforms, yes, both nations want to move in that direction, but whether they'll be able to cooperate and collaborate on that, we have to see, because Russian dependence on the Chinese is increasing. Now, what has happened is this Russia-Ukraine conflict, and America's position has actually pushed Russia, which is actually weaning itself away from China, back towards China. And China is using it towards its strategic advantage. If China is trying to call out or pushing towards de-dollarization and trying to call out the American hegemony, it is with the intent of building its own hegemony. It wants to replace the yuan with the dollar. India doesn't want to do that, neither does Russia. So that's going to be critical.
Anand, on that note, I'm sorry to bring this up, but there were also talks about propositions being, brought in at this forum only so that countries now get the opportunity, especially the SCO bloc, to trade in their own currencies. Has there been any confirmation on those reports?
Well, there have been conversations, and SCO increasingly look at the number of nations that are now wanting to join this entire grouping. So you've got Kuwait wanting to join, there is Myanmar coming into the play, UAE, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. All these nations are, Sri Lanka is part of the observer group, Afghanistan is part of this group. Slowly they will become signatories and they want to get enrolled. Some of these nations who are now just coming on board have also been invited to the summit level talks on July 3rd and 4th. That's because most nations, and I think it's out there in public domain, Russia is leading this entire de-dollarization initiative ever since the sanctions. Iran is wanting to do it, China is wanting to do it, India is wanting to do it. All these nations are buying huge amounts of gold because they want to reduce their forex reserves in terms of the dollar in their forex reserves, only about 50% or less than 50% of their forex reserves. Everybody is wanting to hedge their bets. Can nations come to a common engagement? Now, will that be bilateral or different multilateral forums and which different nation groupings based on their equations? That's what remains to be seen. But this conversation, yes, it's happening. Has it been put on paper actively? No, it's not been, because it's a strategic move that you would not want to openly call this out, because then the Western groups will immediately say that you are trying to create SCO as a counter to NATO.
All right.
They're already trying to bring BRICS into the place. So that conversation is happening quietly in terms of trade, etc. But it's not being put on paper as part of the agenda list, the 15-point agenda list.
All right, let me quickly now touch upon China, and on that note, I'll take that next question from Abhishek. Abhishek, the SCO defense ministers meet that happened just days ago, the bone of contention between India and China remained the border disengagement at the two friction points. Was today's meet able to address this matter as far as border security at the LAC is concerned?
So, Kanksha, what we get to know officially in all such meetings that has happened in the past several months, that China has always consistently maintained that it wants to ignore or sort of sideline the border tension and open up new areas of cooperation, or to engage on other areas of trade, commerce, people-to-people exchanges, education, and or anything that can bring India and China closer in terms of mutual interest. Because India happens to be 1.4 billion population nation, it's a huge market, a lot of demand is of Chinese goods. China, there is a lot of dependence, honestly, of Indian domestic consumption comes from Chinese imports. So clearly, China doesn't want to lose this market just because it has a border tension in the northern sector of from India in Ladakh. So China has always maintained that the border tension should be put in an appropriate place in the bilateral relationship, which means that as long as the resolution has not been on the issue of border, other areas should not get impacted. While India has always insisting upon that border resolution or the conflict resolution is the first and primary agenda, and only then normalcy in the relationship can be achieved. So this is the kind of a stalemate that both the sides are trying to negotiate around in the last several months, if you can say.
Anand, soon after the SCO, China's foreign minister will be visiting Islamabad to attend a trilateral dialogue between China, Afghanistan and Pakistan. What explains China's hectic engagements with Taliban-led Afghanistan?
See, the whisper or the active conversation, I should not even say whisper, everybody is talking about it, that on the sidelines in the build-up meetings which were happening of the member states ahead of this foreign ministers council, is that Pakistan's been parroting the China line. Now, China has already turned into a vassal state, because the only nation that is still offering its roles and still propping it up as a country and continuing to hold up and backing it is China. So, and the US has pulled back, so Pakistan is firmly in China's lap. The other aspect is the Taliban and the and Afghanistan government. The Taliban also want money. Whoever is going to give them money or give them a certain level of engagement, they're going to sit with them. The Chinese are actually training their diplomats. They're training them in diplomacy, in terms of how to interact with the world in real politics, etc. The Chinese interest with Afghanistan is lithium. Chinese interest in Afghanistan is rare earth minerals, and they will want to cart all of that because that's what's going to be powering their CPEC projects, and they want to establish that trade route and firmly want to ensure that the Gwadar port functions and they have control over that entire region. That's exactly what China's hegemonistic intent is. Look, one thing we must remember, Akanksha, and to all our viewers who are watching us, see, 1949, 2 years after India's independence, is when Mao Zedong put through the blueprint for China, what he envisaged China under communist rule 100 years later. India, 75 years, now we as a nation think short term. So far we've been thinking 5-year terms because of the elections. The Chinese have not forgotten that blue book. They are in here for the long game. This is their strategy. They will go ahead, get onto a territory, occupy that territory, sit there, then they'll sit and they'll drag the negotiations for 2 years. Then they'll say, keep that aside, we'll talk about it later, let's talk about all of this.
Right.
Then 5 years later they'll say, which place? We've always been here, we're going to hold on to this place. By then India, governments would have changed, leadership would have changed, narrative would have changed. This is the Chinese long game. In this game, India is part of the SCO right now to ensure that it doesn't become a Chinese hegemony. That's the reason why India is there. And what is India pushing? India is pushing real requirements of these nations and telling them, listen, I am here to engage with you on a people-to-people basis, not with an expansionist design, but with a co-living, cohabitation design, and with the fact that this entire region needs to prosper economically. That's why we are championing the causes of startups and traditional medicine. Chinese intent is very clear. They want to replace America as the world's hegemonistic entity and force.
All right. On that note, I'll have to close this discussion. Many thanks to you, Anand and Abhishek, for bringing in all those details and joining us live from Goa. But let's try and figure out the dynamics between India and China, because that was one of the significant bilaterals that took place. And for that, I'm also joined in by the CCP spokesperson, Victor Gao, who is joining me live right now. Many thanks to you, Victor. Victor, let's also talk about the bilateral today, where the focus of today's bilateral remained border security. How do you assess the message sent out by the foreign ministers of both the countries, Dr. S. Jaishankar and Qin Gang? Because let's not forget, both of them have reiterated that peace and tranquility is of utmost importance at the border.
Thank you very much for having me. China and India are the two superpopulations in the world, each with a population of more than 1 billion. And now India may be larger than China in terms of the population. That gives both China and India added responsibilities, not only in dealing with each other, but also in terms of international relations as a whole. That means China and India should demonstrate a higher level of responsibility in dealing with the existing territorial disputes between them. It is worth emphasizing that the territorial disputes were not created by either China or India. It were created by the British Indian Empire. And neither China nor India should be hijacked by those bad British imperial days, for example, and both China and India should look forward to the future, meaning they should do whatever they can to stabilize their border region and do their best to put the territorial disputes behind them. In that sense, both China and India, as the only two superpopulations in the world, can do better for themselves, for each other, as well as for mankind as a whole.
Victor, the SCO Defence Ministers meet also happened just a few days ago. And during this meet between the Defence Ministers of India and China, the bone of contention remained the border disengagement at two friction points. Will the meet that's just taken place between the foreign ministers of India and China be able to take this border disengagement a step forward?
First of all, the border disputes between China and India are very complicated because India as a country and China have never formally drawn their border through a treaty. While the British Indian Empire tried to approach China deeper and deeper, there was no internationally recognized border between China and India. And China has never formally recognized the Meihong line between China and India. Therefore, I think in due time, these two countries need to really go back to history and consider the current situations in the world to use their wisdom and courage to draw a final line of control or a border between them. That may take a while, I would suppose. However, for both China and India, the final settlement of their border disputes will be so important for both China and India that it will be absolutely worthwhile for them to do so. Meanwhile, to stabilize the border or the line of actual control is absolutely important.
All right. Many thanks to you, Victor Gao, for sharing in your precious observations.